I was walking through the house the other day and I walked into Jacob's room and he was watching videos on the computer. And he turned and looked at me and he said, "Hey, Pop, usually when things come out later, the older stuff is not as good as the new stuff as far as design is concerned." I said, "Most of the time that's true." He said, "Well, I have a question for you." And he asked me the question, and I thought, this is kind of a video I've been wanting to do anyway. Um, this is going to be one of these educational subjects that most people are probably already going to agree with. But Jacob's right here, so I'm going to have him ask the question.
So I was watching this video about this guy, and his electronic ignition broke down on the side of the road. And he told me that electronic ignition is worse than points because of their reliability. So can you explain, is that true?
All right, perfect. All right, well, the answer is electronic ignition is more reliable than points. All right, and there are several things about electronic ignition that are better. Performance is one. That's the most important thing to me. But a lot of the people out there, they'd rather have the extra reliability as opposed to the extra performance. And we're only talking maybe, most of the time, maybe 10 or 15 horsepower, be about the biggest you could get out of it. So it still, 15 horsepower is 15 horsepower. By the time you get done doing everything and you add 15 to it, it could be 30, 40, who knows? But it's still important. So sitting on the side of the road is probably the reason why this guy mentioned this. And I think I know what you're talking about and who you're talking about. Well, let's take a quickie look here and talk about performance. I mean, not performance. Let's take a quickie look here and talk about reliability. Which one is more reliable? All right, so here's electronic distributor. An electronic distributor literally has no, there are moving parts, but there are no moving parts electronically. All right, electronically, there is 0 moving parts. On a points distributor, you have the points. Okay, now one of the things that happens with these points is as they open and close, they shoot a little arc across here, and that little arc slowly burns those away. And that's part of the reason that a tune-up is necessary with these points, is to get those burnt points. Now you can file them and clean them up, but it takes maintenance. All right, now every once in a while, this condenser will go bad. You're dead on the side of the road. Every once in a while, these points will burn to the point where it doesn't run. You're dead on the side of the road. Now, these points burn differently depending on the ballast resistor and the condition of this condenser. You're on the side of the road. Now, you're on the side of the road. You could be going down the road with this, and your pickup coil goes bad, or your electronic module goes bad, or the typical thing back in the day was the ballast resistor went bad. But on the other hand, could be a coil goes bad too. So all those, there's a lot. So here you have your points, your condenser, a coil, and a ballast resistor. Here you have a pickup coil, an electronic module, a condenser, and or not a condenser, I mean a ballast resistor, and a coil. 4 things. Now let's just say, let's talk about as far as reliability goes. No moving parts is always more reliable than moving parts. Let's just start with that. But as far as electronic ignition goes, these the issues that they had with these are now fixed. There's nothing wrong with this stuff. It does not break down anymore. What used to break down a lot was a ballast resistor. I'm the winner. You know why? I have points.
You know why I'm the winner? Because I have electronics.
Well, I like old school. Old school's easy to fix.
I like the new style today because it's also easy to fix.
Is it easy? Oh.
Very easy.
Well, this I can check on the side of the road. Can you check this one on the side of the road?
Sure can.
Huh. Now to start off with, points ignition works.
Yeah.
It works at every time. It's great.
Yeah.
So if you've already got this, why make an upgrade?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose if you're doing something like the Barracuda with a slant 6 and a grocery getter,
Yeah.
that's probably not real important to get electronic ignition. But let's talk about some of the advantages to electronic overpoints. And we're going to just start off with the first one, and that is when this distributor is set,
Yes.
you don't touch it. If you set the points on this distributor, every time you go to do something with the tune-up, you're going to have to recheck your timing, because as the points wear out, it changes the ignition timing.
Yep.
This has nothing to wear out. There is no physical connection in here.
Yeah.
How come you got a jacket on? Oh, it's cold. This is why we're going to do a video on distributors in the garage as opposed to working on something on the outside. Sound like a good idea to you?
Yeah.
I'm tired of being cold.
All right.
There's an electronic distributor. Now, if you look in there, if you see this thing, there is no physical connection in here. None whatsoever.
No.
Now, that means that there is nothing in here that will affect the ignition timing over time. When you have points distributor like this, hold that. When you have a points distributor like that, this is a little on-off switch in here. That's your points. I'll go ahead and turn it slowly.
Can you see it coming around?
Yep, can you see that? I don't know if you, yeah, I can see
Yeah,
it
you
moving.
can see it tapping right here.
Okay, now, as this turns around, those contact points here burn slowly.
Yep.
And right down here, there's a cam. And that little cam rubs against a phenolic, I don't know, bumper we'll call it. And that bumper wears out. And over time, as that wears out, it will change the ignition timing. So you are always going to have to, when you have points, you're always going to have to get your timing light out to check the timing. Now, on an electronic ignition, over time, the only thing that will change the timing on this distributor, other than something breaking, is your cam, your timing chain. As it gets worn out and loose, it could affect this. But not because of the distributor, but because the timing chain is wearing out. Timing chain also affects this one too. So this one is affected the same way as this one, but this one is not affected the same way as this one.
Yeah.
All right, now one other question we're going to try to answer today. This is vacuum advance.
Yep.
Okay? Now, most people with race cars don't have these on here. They take them off or they buy a distributor without them. Which one do you think I would rather have?
I would rather have vacuum advance.
Yeah, me too. Now, I know you've heard me talk about this before, but this vacuum advance is a pretty important piece to the drivability, flexibility of a street car.
Yeah.
But even in race cars, I say you use this, okay? And I'll explain why that is also. Now, I've done, with some experience in racing, I have done both ways. And this was the winner in the end. And I'll explain that. Now, it's subtle. It's not huge.
Yeah.
It's not the most important thing. Just like having electronic ignition is not the end all to everything. And having points ignition is not bad for everything, okay? But we'll show how this works. All right, one of the things that I keep hearing about from some people is points are so much easier to diagnose. Well, on an old school Chrysler electronic ignition, there's 5 wires that go to the module. There's 2 wires that go to the distributor. How much do you need to remember? 2 of these wires going to the module come from the distributor. Okay? So all you got to do is keep in your mind what's going on. This is all you need. This came from Harbor Freight for $5. Sits easily in the glove box of your car or a small bag. And you can get in here and check these things. It's so easy to diagnose. Now maybe we'll do a video sometime on diagnosing. But let me just throw this little tidbit out there. You can get a brand new electronic module for a Mopar for about $30. You can get a ballast resistor for about $8. You can get a new coil, ignition coil, for your Mopar, $11. And you're going down the road. Even if you had a race car and you're broke down on the side of the road, I mean, I'm talking a good fast street car. Doesn't matter if you put something really good back in there as long as you get back home, right? So put these stock parts and pieces in a bag in the trunk of your car. Now, if your points go bad on your, that's GM, if your points go bad, well, you can easily put a spare set of points in your deal. There's a condenser. Sometimes the condensers go bad. Or maybe you need to get a coil. And yes, ballast resistors do go bad on points type ignitions too. So to have all those things, it might cost double for electronic ignition. But we're talking a $30 difference. Okay? This pickup coil, $15. There's no big money here. And these things are so reliable anymore, they hardly ever break down. So learn how to diagnose one, and you can do it for just a few minutes on the side of the road with this piece of junk. All right? It's super easy. It's all over the internet. I mean, there's no reason to worry about diagnostics. Oh, one other thing here. I don't know what year it was, but Mopar moved from a dual ballast resistor to a single ballast resistor about 77, 78, 79, somewhere in there. That has been a long time problem for these older, from 72 when electronics started to come on the scene. From 72 up to that point, sometimes one half of the ballast resistor would go bad and shut your ignition down. Well, the new ignition system eliminates the side of the ballast that went bad. So if you were to get a module for a 78, that module would not need the ballast resistor the same. You can replace the module. It eliminates the side that goes bad and fixes your problem right there on the side of the road. Now they sell new high performance electronic modules for a Mopar that only need the one ballast resistor instead of the dual ballast resistor. Easy stuff. GM has the single module down inside for electronic ignition, and it's super easy to replace. If it ever goes bad, it's not that expensive, and it's all self-contained if you use a HEI. All right, so simple there too. No reason to worry about points there. So without the run out and without, those are the things that make this, to me, a no-brainer to have electronic ignition. Okay, Jacob, one of the important things about electronic ignition over points ignition is what's called distributor run out, okay? Mm-hmm. And distributor run out is a big deal when they get older especially. Now, this is the cam that operates points. Mm-hmm. And here's the shaft out of a distributor. Okay, and that goes down in there like that. Now, as this wears out, this starts to get loose in the distributor and it's allowed to move like this. Okay? Mm-hmm. Well, there's also another moving part, and that's right here. This piece is where your points cam would be, and it sits on here, and it starts to wear out where it can go like this. That causes distributor run out. Now, distributor run out, plain and simply, means that this no longer spins in a perfect circle like you want it to. It starts to go like this. Now, as this stuff starts spinning, it gets out of balance too. It's not perfectly balanced. All right, so as this starts to spin, it gets out of balance, and it starts to flop around inside your distributor. As it flops around, look what happens to the cam. Now, as it's flopping around, this cam is it's got a bigger bump, so it opens the points even farther. And when we get over to this side, it opens it less. That means that this one that's opening the points farther is advancing the distributor on one side and retarding on the other. This should be turning perfectly in the middle here. And it looks like it is. But this particular one is not. This one is a hunk of junk. Now, we can rebuild it and fix it, but what it's doing is this shaft is literally going like this. You can't see it with your eye as I spin it, but it's going like this. Well, as it goes around, some of these, there's 8 bumps because this is for an 8-cylinder. Some of these, the points opens a long way, and some barely work. The further open they go, the more advanced the timing is. So the problem here is you have one cylinder is with low timing and another one's with high timing. This particular distributor right here has an 8-degree ignition difference. Now the problem here is that if you set your ignition timing, if you're a racer, if you're a guy that likes performance, you adjust your ignition until your engine starts to ping and you just back it off a little bit. There are other ways to do it. I do it until the engine pings, and then I back it off slightly. And that's hard to do when you're working on a race car because a race car is too noisy to hear the ping. So then I pull the spark plugs out and read the plugs, and you look at your spark plug and it looks like a fly took a poop on it. Okay? And there are other books and other places out there you can look up that information. But in any case, you set it to the first one that pings. Well, if it just happens to be the one that's off by 8 degrees and you set it to ping, you've got 7 other cylinders with less ignition timing. That means that you have 7 cylinders running weak. 1 is at its max and 7 are weak. Okay? Well, on an electronic distributor, we have this reluctor wheel here. Okay? Every time that notch goes by this pickup coil, it makes a spark. This thing's cut out by a laser. These are exactly that far apart. And it doesn't matter if this one's sitting 10 thousandths or 15 thousandths. It's going to spark at that time. Now, run out does affect them. But the most I've ever seen is a degree and a half of run out. Now, it might be going around just like that points one there. It might be going a long way. But the difference between its spark that it makes is almost nothing. Okay? Now, if you have a distributor machine, you can measure it. Because as this arrow flashes as it's going around, every 90 degrees you'll see a flash, and you can look at these degree marks and you can see, let's say there's, when it fires and you come down here to 90, it should fire exactly. Well, you'll see it move off a degree or 2 degrees. That points distributor over there moves 4 degrees difference. That's 8 degrees on the crankshaft. That's a lot. Now, 8 degrees is more horsepower. If everything is right, 8 degrees is more horsepower than having a jet size that's 5 times too big. Okay? That's a lot. That's a lot. All right. Now, so that's a big performance advantage alone. All right. Now, one of the things here, Jacob, is that the electronic ignition allows you to have, let's say, a hotter spark. Okay? Now, what a coil does is it's exactly that. It's a coil of copper wires. And we get the power going in one side, and then we put this to ground. And when we put this side to ground, it makes an electromagnet on the coil. Now, as soon as we take the ground away, that's what our points are doing. Our points open, it takes the ground away, and our electromagnetic field falls in. And when it falls in over the coil in the middle, that coil in the middle makes a spark, and that jumps out to our spark plug through our rotor, through our distributor cap. Okay? Well, we have to fill this coil up with electrons all the way, then collapse it to have the strongest spark. So there's a time thing involved here. We have very little time. Now, we're talking electricity moves fast, but our engine moves faster. Okay, so what we have is while the points are closed, we are using this wire. It goes out here, goes to our coil. When it's closed, it's completing the circuit and making our electromagnet. When the point's open, and I'm not sure, let me get this over here. Nope, there we go. When our point's open, we take the ground away. So as soon as we go like this, it makes a spark because the coil collapsing its magnetic field. Now, then we close it back up and we allow the charge to happen and we make the magnet grow again inside the distributor. The problem here is as we go so fast, pretty soon we can't get the coil to saturate anymore and the spark gets weaker. Now, granted, it's way up there in the RPM. 5,000 RPMs, depends on the coil you have too. But as these points get dirty, it causes resistance also. So you have time and resistance in here that causes our coil to get weaker and weaker. Now, resistance, if you don't know, that's like if I take that bucket full of water and I pour it into this bucket full of water, and if I take the bucket and I just pour it in, there's really no resistance, and you just, as fast as you can pour it, it goes in. But what happens if I put this funnel in here and I pour the water in? That's resistance. Okay, it takes longer for the electrons to get through and charge the coil up. Well, then they come out with this little jewel. This come off of a 340, and this is dual points. Well, now this is giving us 2 wires, and these 2 wires right here is like putting 2 funnels in. Now we can do twice as much, right? The problem now becomes that the amount of time that the points are closed has to do with how much saturation we have. So as the engine speed goes up, the saturation goes down. The points gives us 2 routes to go. It helps us to have more time for the coil to do its thing, but we still got to clean these, and we still got to look at this one. Doesn't even want to close anymore. And another thing that happens, extreme high RPMs, is this spring isn't strong enough, and these points start to float, and the points don't go close. They start going like this as the engine speed gets too high. We need it to go like this, and it's going like this. Well, that eliminates our coil saturation. Okay, now electronic ignition, it is electronically controlling that, and it makes the coil saturation happen. As soon as the spark is made, the transistor inside closes, sets the power to ground, or sets the coil to ground, makes the coil grow. It gives maximum amount of time, but the good thing is there's no points resistance. The size wire you have is what's going to give you the saturation and make that sucker make electrons, make power, make spark. Okay, so electronic gives you that advantage too. Now, there's no difference between our distributor advance. We can do anything we want with that, so no advantage there between points. But let's go back a little bit first, a little bit on the reliability side. This needs a tune-up. 15,000, 20,000, I don't know, whatever time you need to set your interval to. I don't know what the book says, and I don't care because I don't use it. This does not.
Nope.
This is done. Okay? Whenever I change a cap, I put a dab of oil in there, but I do that with this one too. So this never needs adjusting, never needs anything. The only thing that retards the timing on this is when your timing chain gets old and stretches, then the cam falls behind, it retards the timing here. And so we don't have any issues. There's no tune-up here. There's nothing. Change your cap and rotor and move on. Less work, less money, over time. It's better. Where's horsepower?
High RPM.
That's what I thought. Okay, so that's one advantage here. All right, so we don't have the resistance. We help our coil saturate. We keep making a big spark even at the high RPMs. Also, these points, they start to arc if this condenser gets bad. And, you know, if the condenser gets bad, they start arcing, and it makes for a weak spark and does silly things there too. And that matters too. That's not as big an issue though, because if we keep doing tune-ups, that's not a problem. All right, Jacob, now here's a subject that has nothing to do with electronic ignition or points. Do you want a distributor with vacuum advance or without vacuum advance? Which one do you want? You want the one with the vacuum advance. And that's whether you have points or not.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, let me explain why.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, people out there have decided that because they're running in a race car or they have a high performance street car, the vacuum advance never works at idle unless you have it hooked to a funny spot. It never works at idle, and it never works at wide open throttle. And since we're building a performance car, that's wide open throttle, right? Okay. So why would you ever need vacuum advance on a high performance car? Well, let me ask you this. When you're sitting at the drag strip and you're waiting at the line and the light goes green, you nail it wide open, you're not using vacuum advance. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
When you get to the end of the strip and you let off the throttle and then you got to drive the return road back to the garage area, are you wide open anymore?
No.
All right. Now, if you have a high performance street car
Mm-hmm.
and you're driving down the road, are you wide open throttle?
No.
Now, when you go to nail the throttle with your SS, your RT, your whatever, your vacuum advance is not going to be used when you're wide open while you're beating the people next to you, right?
Yeah.
All right. So here's the thing. When we tune our engine, now a lot of people ain't going to be able to use this probably because they don't take the time to figure it out. But when I tune an engine, I look at each individual spark plug
Mm-hmm.
and I determine whether the spark plug is too hot or too cold.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's too hot, I put a colder plug in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as I put a colder spark plug in the engine,
Mm-hmm.
it makes it closer and closer to fouling. Now, the engine won't foul at wide open throttle because you're producing plenty of heat, and it keeps the spark plug clean. Now, one of the most important things about setting your timing correctly is not have hot spots in your combustion chamber. That's why the minimum that you do to your combustion chamber is you file all the sharp edges out of your combustion chamber so they don't glow red hot and cause pre-ignition. Well, if you have a spark plug glowing red hot, you're causing an area of pre-ignition. So you put a cold enough spark plug in so it no longer does that anymore. Well, here's the problem now. As soon as you let off the gas, combustion temperature drops down, and pretty soon our spark plugs start to get dirty and start to get ugly. Our combustion chambers start to fill up with carbon. We start dirtying up the inside of our engine. But if you put vacuum advance on it, vacuum advance pulls the ignition timing up to its optimum and causes the engine to run cleaner internally and keep the spark plugs hot so where they don't foul. Now, when you finally do get to the point where you want to beat Mr. RT or Mr. SS or whatever you happen to have, and you pull up next to them, guess whose engine's crisp and clean, ready to rock and roll? Mr. Vacuum Advance, okay? Now, in racing, same thing. See, in circle track racing, most of the time you're wide open throttle. Are you wide open throttle under yellow flag? If you have to do a pit stop, are you wide open throttle? During this time under a yellow flag, now when I was doing circle track racing, we worried about fuel economy because we didn't want to have 700 pounds of fuel on board. That fuel sloshes around and affects how much the car handles from beginning to end, going from loose to push. Okay? Well, we could set a more precise amount of fuel in the tank because now under yellow flag, we ended up with huge economy. And when it came time for the green flag to come out, while everybody was blubbering and blowing smoke out the tailpipe, crisp and clean, car took off, ran like a hot rod. Oh, by the way, our spark plugs weren't glowing red, so our ignition timing was up a degree or two more than everybody else's. And when it's up a degree or two more than anybody else's, we now have more torque, and we have just a little bit more top end. And we just hurt them on the power side. Now, this is circle track, this is drag racing, and this is street racing. And the only reason that you should not have vacuum advance on your car is if the sanctioning body does not allow it. Because there were people that we raced with that did not allow vacuum advance. Okay? So, do we need vacuum advance? Yes, we do. Do we want it? Yes, we do. Even if it's a race car, we want vacuum advance. And that's because this allows us to put a colder spark plug in, allows us to run our ignition timing a little bit higher. It keeps our spark plugs clean. It keeps our combustion chamber clean. And by the way, a clean combustion chamber is real good on a street car because you don't plan to take it apart all the time like you do in a racing situation. So put your vacuum advance on. Figure out how to do this because now you can adjust and get your engine to the max. And you may just be able to tune another 12 horsepower out of it. Something like that. And then when you add this to CCing your chambers, and you add the electronic ignition having a truer timing, no run out or very low run out. When you add all these together, you're going to be able to build yourself a winner. And that's important to me because I am a bad loser. So, okay, Jacob, well, we're going to go ahead and sign this off and let's get some people to build in a car that performs like they expect it to.
Yeah.
All right. Well, see you later, Jacob.
See ya. Like and subscribe. Comment down below.
Right on.